Hi everyone, Mike again with MEG Motors. Today we're going to be taking a look at this Weedeater brand FX265 Featherlight trimmer. This is somewhat of a low-end trimmer, 25cc, no clutch, no frills really, but it's a lightweight trimmer, so it's easy for smaller people, women, children to use it. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at it. The things it's got going for it is it's complete, at least. It still has the air filter housing. A lot of times those are missing. And the trigger's still there, still works. It actually looks to be in decent condition. I have already noticed that the fuel lines are completely missing and the primer bulb is cracked. So we know we got fuel issues, and then on the top of that, the pull starter is not retracting this last little bit of cord. So we're gonna have to take a look at the pull starter and see what's going on with that. But before we do any of that work, we're gonna do a start on spray test. So we know we need compression, we need spark, and the spark has to occur at the right time, and we need fuel for this engine to run. And we can test a lot of that with the start on spray. So we're gonna open the air cleaner housing, take out the element, and we're gonna spray a little bit of carburetor cleaner in the opening of the carburetor, and then I hope we have enough pull on this starter. We're going to pull it and see if we can get it to at least try to start, and we know it won't start, but if we can get it to hit a couple of cycles, then we know that the compression is there and the ignition system is working like it should. So let's try that first, and then we'll, as long as that comes out okay, we'll get started on some other repairs. So I'm going to hold the throttle wide open, the choke wide open. We're going to shoot a little shot in there, and then we'll see if we can pull it through a couple of times. I'm going to hold the throttle wide open, and here we go. Checking to make sure that the switch is in the right position. Well, we didn't get anything out of it so far. I'm going to shoot it one more time, and we'll see if we can get it to do anything. Alright, so nothing there. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and pull the spark plug out of it. We'll do a quick test to see if it's firing and see where we go from there. It feels like it's got enough compression to run, so I'm not sure why it won't kick off. But let's pull the spark plug and see what's going on there. Alright, so I'm going to pull this back cover first and give us some room to work. Let's see. Ooh, so here's our spark plug. Got some interesting oxidation on it. Not sure what's going on there. Alright, so I'm going to put it back in the spark plug cable, and I'm going to hold it up against the cylinder here, and I'm going to pull it through. And I can see it firing, which is a good sign. That rarely comes out on camera for some reason, but it does look like it's firing. So I'm going to try shooting this prime straight in the cylinder. We're going to try one more time to see if we can get it to do something for us. All right, so we've had an interesting development. While we were off camera, I pulled the rope and now it won't go back at all. The engine was actually getting very hard to turn over, like it was getting stiff. I don't know if it's actually the engine or something here in the pull start mechanism. So we're gonna go ahead and pull the front end of this apart and see what we can see in there. I'm not really sure what's going on just yet, but we'll take it apart and see. This is another one of those cases where I'm not sure this one is really worth as much trouble as we're going through. It's a pretty low end trimmer. I mean, it has its place because it's lightweight and small, but other than that, it doesn't have a ton going for it. So we'll see. All right, so we got that loose. We're going to take this loose and see if we can pull the shaft out of this. I'll try to anyway. Let's see if there's a lock screw. An interesting clip here. I'm going to try to get out. This clip right here is what just came out. I don't know if that was holding the shaft in. Yeah, seems to have been. All right, so I got the shaft to come out, which is a good sign. And we're going to pull this front cover off and see what we see with the pull starter. All right, we got a couple of wires on the kill switch over here. I'm going to try to get off. All right, so here's our pull starter. I'm not sure. Well, there it goes, just wound back up. I'm not sure what's making it not want to return. I think so. I'm going to take these two clips out. There's two clips right here that hold the spool in. I'm going to take those loose. And then we'll talk for a minute about the pull starter and how we're going to get it apart. All right, so the pull starter has a spring on the underside, and I could attempt to lift this pulley out right now, but there's enough tension on the spring that if I did that, it would pull the spring with it and eventually unwind the spring. So we need to release all of the tension that's on the spring, and we can do that by taking the rope and putting it in this notch right here, and then we can let the spool unwind until it's completely slack. And once it's completely slack, I'll be able to lift this out without taking the spring with it. And so the spring is down underneath this cover. Oh yeah, I can feel that this cover right here has some old grease on it that is just, it's sticky like glue. It's no wonder that it didn't want to return like it should have. So I'm going to attempt to pull this out as well and see if we can look at the spring. Hopefully I can get it out without unwinding the spring, but not the end of the world if it does unwind. All right, so here's our spring. Actually looks okay. I think our problem may mostly have been just this old grease that's on the back of this spool and on the face of this metal disc that has gotten old and sticky over time. So when this is all back together, the hub will contact that spring right there. So I'm going to clean this up a little bit, use a little carburetor cleaner and clean that up, and then we'll see if we can make that work a little bit better. All right, so I've got this cleaned up. I'm going to go ahead and put the spring back in the housing here. All right, and then I'm going to put just a light coat of grease on this piece right here. Normally I don't like to put a lot of grease on parts like this because the grease actually causes dirt to stick and can make things worse. But the manufacturer apparently wanted some grease on there, so we're going to put some back on there. All right, and then we're going to put this back together. So we're going to set this in place. All right, and then to tension it, we're going to do the reverse of what we did before. So we're going to pull the rope up into this slot. We're just going to wind this up a few turns. And pull the handle out and see if we've done it. So it's not quite enough. We got to wind it a couple more turns. I think I want to go one more turn. That's just barely enough tension to pull the handle back as it sits without it being on the engine. So let's do one more. Yeah, I like that better. Okay, and so now we're going to put our keepers back in. All right, that feels pretty good. think we're gonna put this back on. So my fear was that the engine was maybe getting tight, but the engine actually feels really good. So we're gonna put this back together and try again maybe with a little more pull on the rope to see if we can get it to pop off on a start on spray test. All right, so now let's repeat our start on spray test with a little more pull on the rope and see if we can get it to do anything this time. Okay, so with it all back together, let's retry our start on spray test. So we're gonna open the air cleaner, open the throttle, shoot a little shot in there. Let's see what happens. Oh. All right, so we heard that was a little bit of a start. Actually, most of my prime ran out when I tilted this, so it's good we got a little bit of start out of it, but that little bit of a start is enough to tell us that our compression's good and our spark is happening, and it's happening at the right time. So I think we can save this one. We're gonna pull the carburetor off. Like I said, the primer bulb is cracked and the fuel lines are missing, so we're gonna have to do some fuel system work. We'll do that and we'll see if we can make this one run and turn it back into a Weedeater. All right, so now that we've seen it start on spray, let's get the carburetor off of this one and see if we can figure out what all it's gonna need to make it run. We're gonna take these two screws out right here. The fuel lines are already broken and completely missing, so we don't have to worry about disconnecting any fuel lines. And here's our throttle. It's our gasket. So here's our carburetor. Let's see, this looks like a Zama. Yep, this is a Zama. You can see our primer bulb is in bad shape and no fuel lines on it. So I'm going to clean a few of these parts up for just a few minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll open this carburetor up and see what's going on inside. All right, so let's take a look at this carburetor and see how we're doing. So this is a standard diaphragm style carburetor with an integrated primer bulb. And so there's two main halves to this carburetor. There's a fuel pump on one side, which is this side over here, and there's a metering chamber on this side. And so we're going to open up the fuel pump side first and see how things look inside there. Let's see if I can get a whole piece of fuel line off of there. So we're going to take these two screws loose. And take our fuel pump off. And there's our primer bulb, obviously not in very good shape. All right, so here's our fuel pump. And so on this side, we want to look at a few things. It doesn't look too bad in there, actually. So this is our fuel pump diaphragm. And it's important on this side that this diaphragm, this is the fuel pump membrane itself, and these two flaps right here are check valves. They work as one-way valves on the body of the carburetor. And so it's important that they be in place and that they be flexible and they move easily, which they do. And there can't be any rips or tears in this diaphragm right here. And that's all good. So things look pretty good on the fuel pump side. All right, so I was looking at this pump backwards actually. I was thinking that this was the fuel reservoir side of the fuel pump, but it's not. This is where, hopefully you can see how the pick comes out in this hole. So this is the orifice through which the fuel pump will get the pulsing signal from the crankcase. So this hole over here is actually sealed off. And so the fuel actually comes in on the other side of this membrane. So this will sit on here like this, and the fuel will be on this side. And so when the fuel comes out of this opening here, this flap ensures that the fuel cannot go back out this pipe, can't be pushed back to the fuel tank. And so it'll come up out of there into this hole right here, which leads straight into this reservoir. And this is where the fuel will be stored. And then when the fuel is pressurized, it will come out of this orifice, which comes into here and comes up out of this orifice right here. And so the fuel will come up here and be presented here at this small screen where it will be presented to the metering chamber. And this flap ensures that on the intake side, intake cycle of the fuel pump, the fuel is not sucked back out of the carburetor. So that all looks good. I don't see any problems there. And this is the screen that goes to the opposite side of the carburetor. So there's a passage across the middle of the carburetor, and when fuel is present here, it's made available to the metering chamber side. So we need to open up the metering chamber side and see how things look over there. That's typically where we see a lot of troubles. All right, so here's our metering chamber, this metering diaphragm, and we need to take that off. And so what we're looking for on this side is this membrane, like the fuel pump membrane. It can't be torn or ripped, and it should still be soft and flexible. And this one is not terribly bad. I've seen much worse for sure, but it's a little bit stiff. We're going to put a new one in it just to be sure. But the way this works is fuel from the fuel pump side through this screen comes up through this needle right here. And so this is normally full of fuel. And as the engine pulls fuel out of this chamber, it will eventually pull this diaphragm, the metering diaphragm, down until it hits this lever and unseats the needle. And when it unseats the needle, this chamber will fill back up with fuel and the diaphragm will rise back up, allowing the needle to seat back on its seat and block the flow of fuel into this chamber. And so if this diaphragm gets stiff or torn or anything goes wrong with it, then the carburetor either will starve for fuel or it will flood. And we don't want either one of those. This one actually wasn't that bad. This one might have actually run had we put some fuel lines on it. So we're going to go ahead and take the needle out just to make sure that it's okay. And there's a small spring under here, so you want to be careful with this. If that spring goes flying, you'll likely never find it. And so here's our needle. It doesn't look terrible. I'm sure it could use a little cleaning, but I don't see anything that looks too terrible there. So yeah, I'm gonna pull a couple parts. I'm gonna pull a new primer, and this diaphragm actually is sitting on top of a gasket. We need to separate those two. Yeah, so there's our diaphragm. So let me pull some parts and we'll see if we can put this thing back together. All right, so we're in luck. I had the right parts. Here's a new primer and here's a new metering diaphragm. I'm gonna go ahead and put this back together. First thing we're gonna do is we're gonna clean this needle. I'm gonna spray just a little carburetor cleaner over here and spin this needle in over here a few times, so you can see the dirt that's come off of it. And once we have that clean, we'll put it back in. put our spring in place. And then on the metering lever, we have a little button on the metering lever. The spring needs to go around that button when we get it on. So I will typically set it on the spring first and then work it under the needle. And then once we get it in place, we can look from the side and confirm that our spring is in the right location, which it is. And we'll put our retainer screw back in. And then we're going to check the height of this needle, of this lever, is important. Too high or too low, and it can cause the carburetor to starve for fuel or flood. And so the way we check it is we look for the model number of the carburetor, and I can see this one is a C1U. And so I look on this gauge that I have. This is a Zama gauge, and I look for C1U, which is right here. I know this doesn't normally come out on the camera, but there's a C1U. So we're going to use this edge, and when we place this gauge across the carburetor, what we should see is that the lever just touches the gauge. This one is just a touch low, not much, but just a touch. I'm going to raise it up just a touch. We're going to try that test again. You know, we are within just a smidge of touching, so I'm going to leave it right there. And then we're going to put our new diaphragm on, but the gasket goes on first. It always seems to me like the diaphragm should go on first, but it doesn't. So the gasket goes on first, then the diaphragm, and then the cover. All right, and then on the fuel pump side, I'm just going to put our fuel pump body back on. I'm going to put our new primer bulb in place. And we'll put our retainer on and 2 screws. So these two problems that we just fixed, the metering diaphragm and the primer bulb, are probably 95% of the time what goes wrong with these carburetors. So yeah, I would hope to hear some air moving. Yeah, so I can push my finger over here and I can feel the release when I let go, so I know it is pumping air. That's a good sign. All right, so let's put some fuel lines on this, and then we'll put the car back on and see if we can make it run. All right, so I shook some stuff out of the tank, and we got a couple of pieces that we probably need to talk about. This is all just old fuel line, which is not important, but we got this piece, which is used inside the tank on the vent line, and its whole purpose in life is to be put into the fuel line after it's installed in the tank to swell the end of the fuel line so that it won't pull back out of the tank. And so we need the fuel line small enough to get it in the tank, and then we need it too big to come out. And so that's its whole purpose in life, is just to stop the fuel line from pulling out of the tank. And then we got this piece, which if you don't know what this is, we call this a duct spill. It's another one-way valve. And so you see how that opens when you squeeze it. And so this actually goes in the fuel cap. And so it allows the air to come in through the duct spill, but then the duct spill closes and it won't let fuel or anything come back out. And so without this duct spill in place, this gas cap would leak when we use the the trimmer. So it's good that it was in the tank. Sad that it fell out, but good that it was in the tank. So we're going to clean that up and put that back in before we're done. And then we also got this is the fuel pickup, which looks kind of rough, and so I've pulled a new one from my spares, and we're going to put a new one in there when we put the new fuel lines in. All right, so let's work on putting some fuel lines on this. And so hopefully you can see on the tank we have two holes here. There's a big hole and a little hole. This is a big hole, this is a little hole. Typically the little hole is used for the fuel pickup, so that we can use a really small flexible piece of fuel line that will allow the pickup to move around inside the tank as needed to follow the fuel. And so we're going to put this line in first. And it can be challenging to put this line in because I have this tool which is made specifically for pulling in fuel lines, and it fits fine in the big hole, as you can see, but it won't go in the small hole. And so we can't use this tool to pull in a new fuel line. And so I made a homemade tool, which is just made out of a piece of safety wire, and it has a small hook on the end, and we can use that in the small hole if we need it. Sometimes we can push the small line in by hand. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a taper in this small fuel line like this, and I'm going to put a little bit of a lubricant on the fuel line, and I'm going to try to push it in through this hole. We'll see if we can get it to go in. It's about a 50-50 shot most of the time, I think, on pushing this line into place. Yeah, I can tell you it's not going to go. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take my homemade tool right here. We're going to put it in the small hole. We're going to reach in through the neck of the gas tank, and we're going to pull that line out right there. And then we're going to take our awl and we're going to pre-poke a hole in the fuel line, just like that. That'll help us get it on the tool. My tool's kind of closed up a little bit. Let me see if I can open that up. All right, and so we're going to try to get this fuel line to go on our tool. There we go. So yeah, so this is what we want. And then again, we're going to put a little lube on the cable, on the hose, and we're going to pull it up out of the tank. And then we'll take our tool off. All right, and so we're going to pull most of this fuel line through because we need to leave enough in. Only need to leave enough in the tank to allow the fuel pickup to work. So we're going to try to put this fuel pickup on this line, and this can be a challenge sometime because the neck of this fuel pickup is fairly large, and this hose is fairly small. So we'll see what happens. See if we can get it to go on. Yeah, there we go. Got it to go on fairly well. So now we're just going to pull this fuel line out through the tank until we can drop our pickup in there. And we'll just kind of roughly gauge how much fuel line we think we need to have in there. That should be good. All right, so that takes care of our fuel pickup line. Now we still need to put in our vent line. So that's a different size line. But the process is still pretty much the same. We're going to cut a taper in it. This time we're going to get to use our
regular tool. Now we're going to poke a hole in it. We're going to put it on our tool. Alright, so, man, I'm telling you, this trimmer does not want to stay where I want it to. So there we go. We're going to put a little lube on the fuel line. And we're going to pull it up out of the tank. Perfect. All right, and then, like I said, the vent line only needs to extend into the fuel tank a little bit, just enough to vent some line, obviously. And so the goal is to put this piece on the fuel line so that when we pull the excess back, this swelled up part of the line is going to hit the top of the tank, and that's going to be as far as that line will come back. And then it won't pull out of the tank after that. So we're good. So that gets us with our fuel lines in place. Our next step will be to reinstall our carburetor. So we're going to put our 2 mounting screws through the air filter assembly. Put them right there. We're going to hook our throttle cable up. We're going to reattach our carburetor. Here's not the right one. I'm going to tighten these screws down. All right. And so with those in place, the next thing we need to do is hook up our fuel lines. You can tell which line is which. If you push the primer bulb like we did a while ago, I can feel a release of pressure. So this is going to be an outflowing line, which is going to be the line that goes to our return, which is the big line. And so we're going to clip this off right here. So that means that this is going to be our pickup line. Same thing, we're going to clip that off. Put that right on this other fitting. All right, I think we are ready to put some fuel in this and start it up. Let's do one more thing right quick. This piece right here is it's actually just held in place by this star washer that's all around it. I'm not sure how this pulled out, but this should just, we'll clean this up just a little bit. This should just fit in here and push it down into place, and it should lock itself in place. There's no real trick to this, no screwing it in or anything. It just fits in just like that. All right, so let me get some fuel and we'll put some fuel in the tank. We'll run a primer test and then we'll see if it'll start. All right, so I had to change the primer bulb out. That one that I had on there actually turned out to be an old one that was, and it failed again already. So we got a new primer bulb on there. So we're gonna pump the primer and we hope to see fuel come up this line and back out this line. Here we go. Now, I already saw fuel come up. That's a good sign. There it is. It's filling up the primer bulb. And there it is going back down to the tank. It's sucking fuel back through this line, which it shouldn't do. But that might not be a problem. This line is not important when it's running. It's only important during the priming. So we're going to see if we can get this to start. I'm going to reset the camera and then we'll see what happens. All right, so with the fixed recoil starter, new fuel lines, new metering diaphragm, yeah, let's see if it'll start. I'm going to pump the primer a couple more times. I'm going to put it on choke. I'm going to hold the throttle wide open. Let's see what happens. I'm going to go off choke. Well, we got a little bit of a start out of it. I'm going to go back on choke. Go to half choke. No choke. Back to full choke. No choke. It acts like it wants to start. I have a feeling. I think we still have some issues in there. Yeah, so it's only starting on choke. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out a carburetor adjustment tool and I'm going to see where the adjustment screws are set. Not sure which tool we need on this one. Looks like we need a spline tool. The screws are actually set about where I thought they should be. We're gonna open them up a little bit and we're going to try again. Back to choke.
Well, it's pretty smoky in here now. But it actually seems to be running okay. I opened the mixture screws a bunch, and it started running okay. I have a feeling if I run it a little bit, and so I'll probably put some line on it, and I'll take it out and I'll run it a little bit in the yard, and I have a feeling if I run it a little bit, it'll probably need to have those screws back down. They're pretty far out right now, which is not where I normally see them. But yeah, I think we can call this one fixed for now. Like I said, fuel lines, carburetor overhaul, and fixing the recoil. And I think maybe we've turned it back into a usable trimmer. So yeah, we're gonna call this one fixed, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe. Check my playlist. There's other videos out there for small engine repair. And yeah, thanks for watching, and stay tuned, and we'll see you on the next video.